ESPN1420, ESPN1420.com. Welcome back into Acadiana's best sports leader for the best sports fans. I'm Scott Prather, riding with you for the next couple of hours today. We're going to take a break from updating you on the games unfolding today, but still going to stick with March Madness talk. Right now, joining us is Joe Gagliano. He is the author of the book No Gray Areas, and Joe has, you might recognize that name. He's a gambling guru. He's a former bookie, and he was part of a point-shaving scandal that landed him in jail for a little while. And he's here to talk about all of that with some stories in between. Joe, what's going on, man?
Not much, Scott. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
You got it. So let's just start with the NCAA tournament. If somebody's listening and they're looking to lay down a couple of apples over the next few days or in the Sweet 16. What are the best tips for betting in terms of March Madness and the tournament? What do you need to look out for?
Yeah, I think if you're going to fill out the bracket and you're going to put your bracket up against other people and try to compete with points in the rounds, man, my biggest advice is to not be predictable. Not be predictable because everyone's going to have the usual suspects in the Elite Eight and the Final Four and the championship game. You're going to have the Villanovas, the Kansases, the Carolinas, the Dukes, the Gonzagas. So all those teams are pretty much, there's a lot of confidence that those teams are going to get to the Final Four, the Elite Eight. So you're not going to surprise anyone. So if you have a 12 seed or a 10 seed going to the Elite Eight or the Sweet 16, yeah, you might get lucky and hit it, but the reality is you're really not going to surprise anyone else. So where you're gonna pick up your points and make your pool and your bracket different from other brackets are the points you pick up in round 1 and round 2. So the 5 versus 12 matchups, the 6 versus 11s, the 7 versus 10s. My advice is to not always pick the lower seeded or the higher seeded teams. To pick teams that have momentum on their side. We can't lose track of the fact that these are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. They're wickedly talented athletically, but not mentally mature enough where they're stable. So what happens is you get these kids, and you get these kids that have momentum on their side, and the coaching staff that has these kids actually believing they could set the world on fire. I like looking at the last 5 games that they've played. If they're 4-1 or 5-0 in their last 5 games, even if they're from an inferior conference and playing a superior conference team, I like looking at the entire momentum factor.
Joe Gagliano, our guest right now. Who's hot going into the tournament, and maybe a team that's struggling a little bit, like a Maryland or a Louisville, you would say you don't want to put them in your Final Four. Yeah,
probably not, because Maryland and Louisville, they got in on their name, they got in on their strength of schedule, and they got in what they did via their laurels earlier in the season. You look at the tail end of their seasons, they really weren't playing that well. And when you get an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, and that's their mindset, and they're kind of in that funk, you have to be careful. Rather than getting a team that's 5-0 and setting the world on fire and believing in themselves.
ESPN1420, ESPN1420.com. What should fans be wary of right now? Like maybe some scams and scandals. I would imagine, Joe, kind of the dark side of gambling better than most with your history. Where should fans avoid because I ask you this, Joe, because I think the NCAA tournament is probably more than any other sporting event, with the exception of the Super Bowl, is where a lot of your sort of casual bettors, guys, recreational bettors, people that don't bet too much, they kind of peek their head out just kind of for the novelty, the fun of it. Maybe novelty is the wrong word. So with that, I'm sure comes a lot of a lot of people looking to take advantage of them. So where do they need to be weary?
Well, I think the way the people can take advantage of the NCAA tournament is when people are filling out their brackets and trying to put these brackets into gambling pools or online stuff or or paying services online to put their brackets up against other brackets, those are questionable. And you might as well just take your money and flush it down the toilet, because you don't know what's going on the other side. You don't know who's calculating the brackets, and if you're getting a fair shake up against other brackets that were submitted, how much money is going to the house, how much money they're actually paying out. I mean, if you're going to compete in a bracket with your office mates and with friends and family, hey, that's a whole different story. But in terms of corruption inside the game itself, Scott, man, I just don't think that exists. Not at the level of the NCAA tournament, not at the level of the NFL playoffs or Super Bowl. I think nowadays it's next to impossible to fix and control a team sport. I think basketball, college basketball, you get these young superstars that are one and done, two and done. They're playing for their slot in the NBA. They're not controlling the game and dictating the tempo the way a Headache Smith did with the Arizona State team back in 93, 94. So I think it's really challenging to fix a team sport like basketball, either in college or in NBA. And, you know, football, you can't really fix a football game anyhow. There's 22 players on the field. Even if you had the quarterback in your pocket for some odd reason and he threw 3 picks in the first quarter, he's probably going to get yanked out of the game. So I think team sports as a whole, baseball, if you had a pitcher throwing some cheese down the middle for the first couple innings and bet the over, maybe you can do it, but these pitchers are so highly paid, you're not going to really motivate them. Hockey, you get a goalie to put 2 or 3 goals through his wickets in the first period and bet the over. You got a shot there. But I think the corruption lies in individual sports. I think the corruption in UFC really needs to be discussed. I think the corruption in tennis really needs to be discussed. Anything where it's an individual sports and these athletes are not really highly compensated, yet there's a betting line for or against them. It makes it really easy to motivate them to go to the dark side.
Joe Gagliano, our guest. Very interesting, Joe. Maybe continue down that path a little bit. What, you know, I know you will, because I watch tennis a lot, but I kind of watch the Grand Slams. You know, I watch the big ones. I watch the superstars. But I'll occasionally read on the ticker a tennis match somewhere in the world early in a tournament where, you know, the feds are called in. They're looking into it. Odd stuff's happening. Why tennis? Why UFC? Is it the big fights? Is it the big matches, or is it kind of maybe beginning of the card, early in a tournament? Where exactly? What aspect of it do you feel like should be discussed more, as you pointed out?
No, Scott, I can give you I can give you a ton of examples here. I mean, you look at UFC, you look at tennis. These athletes are not very highly compensated. You look at an Anderson Silva, for example. Pound for pound, was the best fighter in the UFC for many years, was the face of the UFC, was the lead fight, the main event in all these cards that he was on. And you look at 3-4 fights back against Chris Weidman, I mean, there was known disputes between him and Dana White that he was really unhappy with his payments and his contract. And that fight against Chris Weidman, he was the main event. They drew tens of hundreds of millions of dollars for pay-per-view, and he got a $2 million payday. And he was really upset with that. So you look at that kid, for example, making $2 million, and he knows the money he's generating for the UFC, but yet in Europe and Australia, there are legalized sports books out there. Now here's a kid, Anderson Silva, that grew up in Brazil, and I'm just saying hypothetically, if he wanted to, he can get 2 or 3 of his kids that he grew up with in Brazil, send them to Europe or send them to Australia with a duffel bag full of $500,000, go pick up 10-1 against him, and all he's got to do is get caught in an armbar or a chokehold and make it look like it's a fluke that it happened, and the rematch will be worth even more to him. But in the meantime, he picks up $5 million cash without taxes overseas. So, hey, but then you could look at the flip side. You're going to have the argument saying, well, hey, he got paid $2 million for this fight. Well, $2 million to you and I is a lot of money, but to these kids that have a career lifespan of 3, maybe 5 years, that have to pay taxes, that have to pay traveling, that have to pay training, at the end of the day, on a fight where he's going to gross $2 million, he might walk away with $800,000, $900,000. And sure, that's a boatload of money, but to get your brains beat in and only have longevity of another 3 to 4 to 5 years, it's not going to be his holy grail at the end of his career. So I'm saying there's a lot of temptation, and the same thing with tennis. You could make the same argument for tennis. These kids are not highly paid, but yet there's a betting line on them. A lot of the tennis team, a lot of the people that are on the tennis tour barely make enough to cover their travel expenses. So it's just too incentivizing for these kids to look at the dark side.
ESPN1420 and .com. Really interesting stuff here from Joe Gagliano, author of No Gray Areas, professional betting guru as well. We'll get back to some tips around the tournament in a moment, but this discussion specifically, Joe, in your book, No Gray Areas, you cover, some things that unfolded in your life, and the Arizona State point scandal, the point shaving scandal back in the early 90s. I know a lot of guys went to jail for a time. I think you were sentenced to 15 months in prison. At what point during that, because I'm fascinated by it, at what point did you kind of realize, and you were a lot younger, oh bleep, I think we might get in trouble here. Was there one point where the wheels kind of came off? And you don't have to give everything away because I advise folks to go buy your book, but take us through that if you will, just a little.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, we're all products of our environment, and at the age of 22, 23, when all this stuff happened in my life with the Arizona State scandal, I was trading bond futures at the Board of Trade in Chicago, and, I looked up to successful traders that were on the trading floor, and those traders embraced the gray areas. So I think my moral compass at a young age was tilted, and I say that not to try to rationalize it, but I just kind of give you a sense of where I was at that young age. So when the Arizona State scandal opportunity popped up, had my brother was going to school at Arizona State, lived next door to a bookmaker on campus. His bookmaker had one of his clients was Headache Smith, who was a stud for the Arizona State basketball team. And he got into the bookmaker for 25 or 30 grand and had no way to pay it. And so I concocted the plan. So, hey, I'll forgive your debt, and I'll pay you $50,000 a game if you give me the outcome of 2 games. Well, greed kills more than anything else, and 2 games turned into 3, 3 games turned into 4, and for the most part, I got away with it. For the most part, yeah, there was a lot of speculation. There was a ton of line movement. The line moved to 10 points the last game on Game 4, and there was a lot of speculation that, hey, this game could be fixed. There could be some type of shenanigans going on. But there was never anything substantive on the whole thing. And so 2-3 years after the fact, I thought it was pretty much over with and done. I'd made a few bucks on the whole thing. It was a heck of a roller coaster ride. A couple kids on campus got in trouble, a couple kids that I wouldn't even know if I was in the same room with. A couple kids on campus got in trouble. One was for some drug case, and one was for some credit card scam, and both of those kids played Monty Hall, let's make a deal, and had some factual evidence about the ASU thing and kind of broke everything open, and that's how the indictments came.
Wow. So what's going through your mind 3 years after the fact when you get a phone call that they're looking into it?
Well, I think it was 3 years after the fact, after, through maturity and through life lessons, I kind of figured out that what I did wasn't exactly a good thing. And hopefully that doesn't come across wrong, because at the time when I was at the Board of Trade and trading and going back and forth to Vegas, and sure, I was bribing 2 college basketball players, I didn't really view it as, I knew it wasn't exactly right, but I didn't really view it exactly as wrong. I kind of viewed it, and that's kind of the title for the book, No Gray Areas, is I viewed it as a gray area, that, hey, I'm just going to Vegas, I'm just making a few bets, nobody's going to get hurt. But over the course of life, and I guess, through maturity, I realized, man, what I did was wrong, and there is no gray area. It's either black or white, or it's right or wrong. And so, that's, I guess it's how life evolves, and it's how things kind of shake out at the end of the day.
Yeah, no doubt. Good stuff from Joe Gagliano. And you mature, things change. You pay you do your time for the crime, and your outlook's on it different. But going back to something you said earlier, you're more wary of it in sports like the individual sports like tennis, UFC, where the majority of the fighters are underpaid compared to what the house is bringing in. And you mentioned college basketball today. It's just it can't be done, and the one and doners. But there's so many teams in college sports. what ultimately at a level of, maybe a team that's not one and doneers, why is it harder to get away with today? Because first of all, I agree with you. I think in the team sports, because I'll get those phone calls on the show, this was fixed, that was fixed. And then I start going down, all the people that, what do they have to gain here by fixing this basket? I could go on for a while about it. But why it at every level of maybe college athletics where there's a large discussion of, pay for play, right, wrong, what have you. And why do you think it's just not happening today at all?
Why do I think it's not happening? I think it's too difficult to happen. You need for a guy to put millions of dollars on the line to control an outcome of a game. Man, you better be certain you can do it. And I just don't think the right ingredients are in place for certain teams to do it. You need the coach that's going to allow the player to dictate the tempo and play the entire game, no matter if he's playing well or playing poorly. You need a player that has the ability to do it. Now, most of the players that have the ability to do it, these contracts that they're playing for, whether all these professional contracts they're playing for, there's so many flipping dollars behind it. They're so incentivized to play well. So I think the ingredients, what you need for an idiot like me or anyone that could possibly concoct a plan like this to put substantial dollars behind it, you want to have a certain degree of certainty you're going to be successful. And I just don't think the ingredients are available to have that success and make sure you can actually have the outcome in play the way you're going to need it. So that's why I think it's not as prevalent as people think. I mean, the betting lines, the line prognosticators are just spot on how they pick these lines out and how they forecast these lines, and that's why people tend to believe that the games are fixed, because the lines generally tend to fall very close to what the lines were set at. But I believe it's really tough for a player, coaching staff, or anyone that has the ability to control that game to actually figure out how to manipulate it as needed.
Joe Gagliano is his name. No Gray Areas is the name of the book. Joe, when you were sentenced to the 15 months in prison and the 3 years parole in the community service, you had mentioned that by the time years after the fact that I guess the point shaving had come to light, that you'd grown up a lot and sort of realized, boy, that wasn't a good thing I did. But at that point, the sentencing, how did your life change after that? And at what point in your life, the follow-up to that question is, at what point in your life did you decide that, what, I'm going to write a book about all this stuff?
Well, it happened when I got out of prison in 2000, Scott. I was literally performing for an audience of many. And I say that because with the convicted felon label on my back, I was continually trying to show other people and prove to other people that I'm not this bad guy.
Sure.
I'm not this convicted felon, and I'm going to show you I can do all these good things. So, I'm an entrepreneurial junkie by nature, and I was blessed. I had a really good ride and developed a few companies and had a lot of success in the early 2000s, but just wasn't a good steward for it because, as I wrote about in the book, because I felt the need to having to prove everyone wrong about me, I went out and bought the planes and the bigger houses and the racehorses and the boats in San Diego and pretty much every flippin' toy you could possibly imagine, and I wasn't a good steward for those blessings. So in 2008, 2009, when the world kind of fell apart, I was pretty highly leveraged, and I was pretty highly leveraged in a lot of real estate deals, and when the market fell out, when the market fell apart and the bottom fell out, I got my butt handed to me. And so I ended up getting indicted again. And that's really what the book is all about. It's about, hey, I made a choice in 1993-94 to compromise my integrity and to agree to do the ASU, to finance the ASU scandal. And that choice that I made at a young age of 22 or 23 years old decided my future, and decided my future in a way where I was labeled and branded a felon. And so when I remotely made a mistake 20 years later, And I don't even know, and I'll be candid with you, just like I wrote about in the book, I don't even know what the mistake was in 2010 or 11 that I actually got indicted on. I got indicted on a real estate deal that I actually lost $1.5 million on, that the bank actually underwritten the heck out of it, that there were 3 appraisals done. But the value fell apart, and so they indicted me on 6 counts of conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Well, I beat 6 of the 7 counts 8 days a week if I took them to trial, but the one count that had me signing my dad's name without the proper power of attorney was 50-50 at best. So you look at that, you look at it like I got indicted. In my heart, I feel like I got indicted because I was low-hanging fruit for the government. If I went to trial and I lost on that one count, I'm looking at a mandatory minimum of 10 years just because of my prior with the ASU thing. So it was a really dark time for me in 2013 that I had to plead guilty for something that I did not believe in my heart that I did. It was a real dark time for me in 2013 that I had to tell my 4 children that, hey, I'm going away to prison because of what happened here, and I'm not really even sure what I did. So I got sentenced to 30 months. And that's when I decided to write the book, Scott. And I sat inside prison in all of 2014 and typed out this book on a 20-year-old typewriter with no correction tape and decided to put my journey on paper just for the sole purpose of telling my kids. This way my kids can actually see and be able to read why their father is a 2-time felon. And I ended up giving it to a few people that I have in my circle that I know and I trust, and they ended up saying that, hey, there's a bigger message here. There's a message here about life choices. There's a message here that others can benefit from the consequences of life choices. And if you compromise your integrity, you get 1 or 2 degrees off center. Later on down life, you're going to find yourself pretty flippin' difficult to get back to center again.
We've got a top 20 baseball team here in Lafayette, Louisiana, and Louisiana's Raging Cajuns, and we air all their games. And the head coach, Tony Robichaux, tells his players when they make a mistake, turn your mess into a message. And it sounds like that's what this book's kind of about. You're just trying to turn your mess into a message, primarily for your kids, but for anyone else that comes across the book.
Well, I'll tell you what's been really cool for me, Scott. People are going to say, hey, he's a convicted felon. He wrote a book to make money. Those people are ignorant, because I'm telling you straight up, man, there is no money in a book whatsoever, number one. Number 2 is I've turned down several 7-figure offers to tell my story because they wanted control of the story. They wanted to glamorize it and Hollywoodize it, and who knows what they were going to do to the story. So it's not, I'm telling you, as God is my witness, it's not about any form of dollars whatsoever. What it's about in my heart is about the integrity of the message, that hopefully I can make a difference with my crazy journey and the pain that I've gone through in my life and some of the poor choices that I've made that's been magnified pretty hard. I pray and I hope that I can make a difference in somebody's life, that when they're young and impressionable, that they can see that there's consequences of their mistakes. We're doing a movie right now. I'm working on documentary stuff that could be used as curriculum for incoming freshman athletes. I'm trying to speak to younger kids. I'm trying to speak to different universities and sports management classes and telling them the roadmap of what could happen if you're not paying attention and cognizant of your choices. So I am doing my best to use my painful journey as a positive message for others.
The gambling has obviously had a very big impact on your life. For anyone listening, because we started out just talking about games in the tournament and tips and things like that, but for anyone listening, at what point would you say, you know what, you need some help here? This is now kind of gotten a hold of you.
Well, I think if you don't have discipline, Scott, whether it's in anything you do, I came from a trading background. I traded in the markets. I still do to this day. The biggest key to a successful trader is discipline. The biggest key to a successful gambler is discipline. Whether it's X amount of your bankroll per game, whether it's, and defining your bankroll. If you're gambling in hopes of paying your rent or paying your car payment, man, you better get out of the game completely, because that is a recipe for disaster. But if you're gambling with discipline, dollars you could afford to lose, dollars that are calculated, hey, I'm probably an advocate for it at that point.
It's easier said than done, right? Though, I mean, it's like that discipline is if everyone had that discipline, there really wouldn't be a gambling industry, right? But it's a $1 billion industry because so many don't have that discipline.
No, you're spot on. Hey, Vegas does what they do, and bookmakers, make what they make because they basically charge for an opinion. They're charging 10% to everyone to have an opinion, and they don't care who wins or who loses. They know that 10% for that opinion is going to add up, and it's a no-lose situation for them.
Very, very interesting stuff from Joe Gagliano. His book is called No Gray Areas. Check it out. You can, Amazon, Google it. You can learn more about it. But in the meantime, Joe, I know your life's certainly been an interesting one, and thanks for taking the time to share it with us. And when you're watching, last question, when you're watching all these games, are you able to kind of watch as a fan, or is that betting in you in terms of knowing all the lines? Is that what kind of keeps how do you view sports now today?
Hey, I am a sports fan, first and foremost. I believe in the integrity of sports. I love the competition in sports. I have two very dear friends that were high-profile professional athletes, and our 90% of our conversations are about sports. So I am passionate about it, and I want to believe in the inherent good in the competitive side of every athlete. But, hey, I'm not going to lie to you. When I look at a game and I see a close game and I see they're two highly touted teams, I'll go on a website and say out of curiosity, what was the line for that game and where did it land? Because it's always so coincidental that these odds makers and these lines makers are so spot on, and so it has me wondering in the back of my mind, that's odd. That's odd that it falls where it fell. But hey, I am a sports fan first and foremost, though.
How do they? I mean, how are they so good at it? You know what I mean? Like I mean, the line makers. How are they? Like, how do you acquire a talent at that level that those guys have? Because as you said, so many times it's just so close.
Gotcha. Scott, I've gone through there and I've ran all types of different metrics, looking at algorithms, looking at historical data, and I see the numbers that they see. There's certainly no secret sauce, but I'm telling you, it's freaky. When you actually think about it, it's freaky, and they are just spot on, but they're not using anything that the public doesn't have access to. They've got the same information the public has access to. They've got the same injury reports. They've got the same historical data, but they calculate it in a way where hey, all they're trying to do is put a betting line out there that's going to draw attention and get action on both sides. That's all they're trying to do. So if they're successful in doing that, they really don't care who wins or loses. So if Duke is playing Troy and they're going to put a 16, 17-point line out there, they're going to put a line out there that says, okay, we hope the public comes in and bets Duke, but we also want to make it attractive enough for people to come in and bet Troy. Because at the end of the day, they try to get X amount of dollars on Duke and X amount of dollars on Troy, and at the end of the day, they just try to make their 10%. They're indifferent to who wins the game. So that's what they do with the betting line. They try to put a number on there that's going to get action on both sides of the table.
Good stuff. All right, I got to let you run, man. I've kept you long enough. Joe Gagliano has been our guest. No Gray Areas is the name of the book. Joe, enjoy the games, man, and I appreciate the time.
Scott, I appreciate it. Check out nograyAreas.com, and gray is spelled Grey.
That's it, nograyAreas.com.